Jung's most dangerous discovery wasn't about mental illness. It was about people who see everything others miss, and why this ability destroys them. He called it the curse of the superior function. And if you've ever felt like you're drowning in other people's emotions while they remain blissfully unaware, you're about to discover why your gift might be your greatest threat. What Jung witnessed in his private practice would shake the foundations of everything we thought we knew about empathy, consciousness, and the price of seeing too much. This isn't just another psychology video. This is about the hidden epidemic of highly sensitive souls who carry the weight of collective unconsciousness on their shoulders, and why most of them never survive the burden intact. If you've ever wondered why you feel everything so deeply while others seem to glide through life untouched, prepare yourself for a truth that will change everything you thought you knew about your nature. In the summer of 1913, Jung encountered a patient who would forever alter his understanding of human consciousness. The woman, whom he referred to only as Patient M in his private notes, possessed what he initially celebrated as an extraordinary gift. She could sense the emotional undercurrents in any room, predict relational dynamics with uncanny accuracy, and seemed to absorb the psychological states of everyone around her like a human sponge. For months, Jung marveled at her abilities, documenting what he believed was evidence of humanity's next evolutionary leap in consciousness. But then came the day Patient M snapped. Jung arrived at his office to find her in a state he had never witnessed before. Not psychotic, not manic, but something far more disturbing. She had become a mirror of every broken soul she had ever encountered. She spoke in the voices of her abusive father, her depressed mother, her anxious sister, cycling through personalities and traumas that weren't even her own. Jung realized with horror that her empathic gift hadn't elevated her consciousness. It had shattered her individual identity completely. This was the moment Jung first understood what he would later call the shadow of empathy. In his private journals, he wrote these chilling words: "The one who feels all becomes no one. The gift that promises connection delivers only dissolution. I have witnessed the price of seeing too clearly, and it is nothing less than the annihilation of the self." Patient M had become what Jung termed an emotional chameleon, her own essence completely subsumed by the psychological residue of others. Jung spent the next decade studying this phenomenon, compiling case after case of individuals whose extraordinary sensitivity had become their psychological prison. He discovered that these highly empathic individuals weren't just feeling other people's emotions. They were literally absorbing and integrating foreign psychological material into their own psychic structure. Their superior function, their gift for emotional perception, had become a curse that threatened their very sanity. The clinical term Jung eventually coined was empathic dissolution syndrome, though he kept his research largely private, fearing it would discourage the very individuals who needed help most. He observed that these patients shared three devastating characteristics. They possessed an almost supernatural ability to read emotional atmospheres. They consistently prioritized others' needs over their own survival, and most tragically, they had completely lost touch with their own authentic emotional landscape. What Jung discovered about the empathic mind would terrify most people, but if you're watching this video, chances are it will explain everything you've ever struggled to understand about yourself. These individuals don't just sense emotions. They become temporary hosts for other people's unprocessed psychological material. Jung wrote in his Red Book, "The empath becomes a living repository for the collective shadow, carrying what others cannot bear to feel." This isn't metaphorical. Jung documented actual physiological changes in his empathic patients. Their nervous systems showed chronic overstimulation. Their sleep patterns reflected the emotional cycles of people they had encountered days earlier. And most disturbing of all, their own emotional responses began mirroring a composite of everyone they had ever tried to help or understand. They were literally losing themselves one interaction at a time. Jung identified 3 specific dangers that plague the unconscious empath, what he called the trinity of empathic destruction. The first danger is emotional vampirism, not that others are deliberately draining them, but that their psychic boundaries are so permeable that they automatically absorb whatever emotional energy surrounds them. Jung observed that his empathic patients would leave therapy sessions more disturbed than when they arrived, having unconsciously taken on his own unprocessed material. The second danger Jung termed identity liquefaction. These individuals become so skilled at adapting to others' emotional needs that they completely lose touch with their own preferences, desires, and even basic personality traits. Jung noted that many of his empathic patients couldn't answer simple questions about their favorite color, preferred activities, or personal goals because their sense of self had become entirely contingent on their current relational context. The third and most devastating danger is what Jung called shadow absorption. Highly empathic individuals don't just feel others' positive emotions. They become magnets for everyone's repressed anger, hidden resentments, and unconscious fears. Jung documented cases where empaths would experience sudden violent urges, inexplicable depression, or paralyzing anxiety that had no connection to their own life circumstances, but perfectly matched the suppressed psychological material of people in their environment. But here's where Jung's research takes a remarkable turn. He didn't just document the destruction, he discovered the path to transformation. Jung realized that these individuals weren't broken or diseased. They were, in his words, evolutionary pioneers who had developed capacities that the rest of humanity would eventually need to survive in an increasingly interconnected world. Their curse was actually humanity's next great gift, but only if they learned to wield it consciously. Jung found that when empaths learned to distinguish between their own emotions and absorbed material, they became capable of healing not just themselves but entire communities. They could sense collective traumas, identify systemic emotional patterns, and facilitate healing on a scale that traditional therapy could never achieve. But this transformation required what Jung called empathic individuation, a process of reclaiming their own psychological territory while maintaining their extraordinary sensitivity. The key distinction Jung discovered was between unconscious absorption and conscious reception. Unconscious empaths become emotional sponges, soaking up whatever psychic material surrounds them without filter or choice. Conscious empaths learn to become selective channels, choosing what to feel, when to feel it, and how to transform absorbed emotions into healing energy rather than personal poison. Jung documented 4 distinct types of empathic individuals, each requiring different approaches to achieve healthy integration. The first type he called the emotional mirror, individuals who unconsciously reflect back whatever energy they encounter. These people often struggle with bipolar-like symptoms, not because of brain chemistry imbalances, but because they're constantly cycling through other people's emotional states. The second type Jung termed the psychic sponge. These individuals absorb emotional material indiscriminately, often becoming overwhelmed in crowds, exhausted after social interactions, and prone to mysterious physical ailments that have no medical explanation, but perfectly correlate with the stress levels of people in their environment. Jung noted that many of these individuals develop chronic fatigue, autoimmune conditions, and digestive issues as their bodies attempt to process foreign emotional toxins. The third empathic type Jung called the unconscious healer. These individuals compulsively seek out broken people, toxic relationships, and dramatic situations, unconsciously believing that their love and understanding can fix everyone around them. Jung observed that they often attract narcissists, addicts, and emotionally unavailable partners who exploit their empathic nature while giving nothing in return. The fourth and rarest type Jung identified as the conscious channel. These individuals had learned to use their empathic abilities intentionally, sensing emotional atmospheres without losing themselves in the process. Jung noted that many great therapists, spiritual teachers, and social reformers belong to this category. They could feel collective pain without becoming personally poisoned by it, transforming absorbed negative energy into healing wisdom. Jung's research revealed that the difference between empathic curse and empathic gift lay entirely in conscious awareness and boundary management. He developed what he called the 4 stages of empathic individuation, a process that allowed sensitive individuals to reclaim their power without losing their extraordinary abilities. The first stage Jung termed recognition. This involves the painful but necessary acknowledgement that much of what you believe to be your own emotional experience is actually absorbed material from others. Jung encouraged his patients to keep detailed emotion logs, tracking their feelings alongside their social interactions to identify patterns of unconscious absorption. The second stage is differentiation, learning to distinguish between authentic personal emotions and foreign psychological material. Jung taught specific techniques for what he called emotional archaeology, helping empaths trace the origins of their feelings to determine whether they belonged to their own psychological landscape or had been unconsciously collected from others. The third stage Jung called integration. This doesn't mean rejecting empathic abilities, but rather learning to use them consciously and selectively. Jung developed exercises that allowed empaths to sense others' emotions without automatically absorbing them, maintaining what he described as loving detachment, the ability to witness pain without becoming poisoned by it. The fourth and final stage, Jung termed transformation. At this level, empaths learn to become conscious alchemists, transforming absorbed negative energy into wisdom, compassion, and healing power. They stop being victims of their sensitivity and become masters of it, using their abilities to facilitate genuine healing in themselves and others. But Jung's most profound discovery was that empathic individuals aren't just random genetic variations. They're evolutionary responses to collective trauma. In times of widespread psychological wounding, humanity produces individuals capable of sensing and processing communal pain. Jung wrote, "The empath is not an accident but an answer, not a mistake but a mechanism of collective healing." This explains why so many empaths are born into dysfunctional families, traumatic environments, or chaotic circumstances. Jung realized that these souls come equipped with the sensitivity needed to transform generational patterns of pain, but only if they survive their initial unconscious phase and learn to wield their gifts consciously. Jung's research also revealed why empaths often feel like aliens in their own culture. They're sensing emotional realities that others either can't perceive or actively avoid confronting. Jung wrote, "The empath sees what others refuse to acknowledge, feels what others have learned to numb, and carries what others have chosen to abandon." This is why they often feel so profoundly alone. They are living in a different emotional reality than the majority of humanity. But here's what Jung discovered that changes everything. Empaths aren't meant to suffer in isolation. They're meant to find each other and create conscious communities of healing. When empaths learn to recognize and support each other, they can accomplish psychological healing work that would be impossible for any individual to achieve alone. Jung documented several cases where groups of conscious empaths were able to identify and transform collective traumas that had plagued communities for generations. They could sense inherited family patterns, cultural wounds, and even historical traumas that were still active in the collective unconscious. Working together, they could facilitate healing on a scale that traditional therapy had never achieved. This is why Jung ultimately came to see empathic individuals not as patients to be cured, but as pioneers to be trained. He believed that as humanity evolved toward greater interconnectedness, empathic abilities would become essential survival skills. Those who developed these capacities early were like advanced scouts, learning to navigate emotional territories that everyone would eventually need to explore. The transformation from empathic curse to empathic gift requires what Jung called sacred selfishness. the radical act of prioritizing your own emotional well-being so that you can serve others from a place of strength rather than depletion. This isn't narcissism. It's spiritual responsibility. Jung wrote, "The wounded healer who hasn't healed themselves becomes a fountain of poison rather than healing." Jung's empathic patients, who achieved successful individuation, shared several key characteristics. They learned to view their sensitivity as a superpower that required training rather than a weakness to be ashamed of. They developed what Jung called emotional sovereignty, the ability to choose their emotional responses, rather than being unconsciously hijacked by others' psychological material. Most importantly, they learned to transform their compulsive helping behaviors into conscious service. Instead of unconsciously attracting broken people who would drain their energy, they began attracting individuals who were genuinely ready for healing and growth. Their relationships became reciprocal rather than parasitic, nourishing rather than depleting. Jung observed that transformed empaths often became natural leaders in their communities, not through dominance or manipulation, but through their ability to sense and address collective emotional needs. They could identify systemic problems before they became crises, facilitate difficult conversations that others couldn't navigate, and create environments where authentic healing became possible. But perhaps Jung's most hopeful discovery was that empathic abilities could be developed and refined throughout life. Even individuals who weren't naturally highly sensitive could learn to become more emotionally intelligent, compassionate, and psychologically aware. Jung believed that empathy was humanity's evolutionary destiny, and that highly sensitive individuals were simply early adopters of capacities that everyone would eventually need to develop. If you've recognized yourself in this description, Jung would want you to know that you are not broken, damaged, or too sensitive for this world. You are ahead of your time, carrying gifts that humanity desperately needs but doesn't yet understand. Your sensitivity isn't a weakness to overcome, but a strength to develop consciously. The path forward isn't to become less empathic, but to become more consciously empathic. This means learning to distinguish between your emotions and absorbed material, developing strong energetic boundaries while maintaining an open heart, and using your abilities to serve others from a place of fullness rather than depletion. Jung would tell you that your struggle with overwhelming emotions, toxic relationships, and feeling misunderstood by others isn't evidence of personal failure. It's evidence that you're operating unconsciously in a role that requires tremendous conscious skill and training. You wouldn't expect someone to perform surgery without medical training, yet society expects empaths to navigate complex emotional territories without any guidance or support. The time has come to reclaim your power, honor your gifts, and join the growing community of conscious empaths who are learning to use their abilities to heal rather than harm themselves and others. You are not too much for this world. This world is finally becoming ready for everything you have to offer. Comment below and let me know which of Jung's 4 empathic types resonates most with your experience. Are you the emotional mirror, constantly reflecting others' energy back to them? The psychic sponge, absorbing everything around you? The unconscious healer, compulsively drawn to fix everyone else? Or are you becoming the conscious channel, learning to use your gifts intentionally? Your story matters, and sharing it helps other empaths realize they're not alone in this journey. Remember to subscribe for more deep dives into Jung's most transformative discoveries. And check out my video on Jung's shadow work practices for empaths. You'll discover specific techniques for reclaiming your psychological territory while honoring your extraordinary gifts. The age of the conscious empath has begun, and you're exactly where you need to be part of this evolutionary transformation.